Hey everyone, it's Mariana, and in this video, it's all about Stephen King. I decided to do a 4-book Stephen King readathon, and I was a little bit worried that I would get author fatigue, but nope, I probably could have read another one of his novels, and I might be reading another one at the moment. Ended up enjoying all of them, and one of them actually immediately made it into my top 5 Stephen King favorites, which I did not expect. Last thing before I start, I am going to go through these books not in the order that I read them, but actually in the lowest rating to highest rating order. I thought that would make more sense for this video in particular. All right, let's get into it. So my lowest rated book of the 4 ended up being Joyland, and that's not to say that I didn't like the book or that it's bad, I just didn't enjoy it as much as the other ones. Joyland is a nice and quick summer mystery. It's set in the 70s in a small town amusement park where the main character, Devin, gets a summer job, and where a girl was murdered on a haunted house ride several years earlier. This is a simple but entertaining read. This is the most plot-driven out of the 4 that I read, and it doesn't completely ignore character development, but there just isn't as much of it as in the other 3. The setting was one of my favorite things about it. I am a big fan of amusement parks and carnivals in general, so this whole situation just made me happy and immediately gave me really good summer mystery vibes. But I simply wish there was more to this book. Particularly, I wished this was more of a ghost story, because King kind of tricks you in the beginning into thinking that this will be a ghost story and a murder mystery. However, the ghost story part really doesn't end up being that prominent. The murder mystery keeps coming up, yes, and that is something that definitely held my interest. But Joyland also has this more dramatic development that kind of takes over the story at some point, and while it is a good subplot, I just wish that King picked one or the other, either the murder mystery or this drama subplot situation, because it just felt to me like neither was explored fully due to the fact that this is a pretty short novel. I ended up giving Joyland 3.5 out of 5 stars. It is definitely an enjoyable summer mystery. I liked it. I think people who enjoy this setting are particularly going to have fun with this one. However, when it comes to Stephen King, you have a ton of books to choose from, and he just has stronger novels than this one. Next up, let's talk about The Long Walk, which is one of his Bachman books. What King does here is he makes really good use of a simple concept. The story is set in the US in a dystopian future and revolves around a group of boys participating in an annual walking competition. The walkers cannot stop and must maintain a minimum speed of 4 miles per hour or they will get a warning. After 3 warnings, they will be shot dead. I'm not going to lie, it took me some time to get into this novel, which is kind of surprising because I generally enjoy dystopian settings. Part of the problem was that you don't really get to find out that much about the world outside of the competition. And even though you don't need that information for the story to work, I still kept wondering what was going on. Why was this a thing? I just wanted more world building. However, as I learned more about these characters, the book naturally grew on me and I got a lot more invested in this story and in what happens to the boys. Also, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but I thought the ending here was very fitting. Like a lot of people, I often struggle with Stephen King's endings. They end up being a little bit of a hit or miss for me, but this one in particular I thought worked really well. So despite not being off to a great start, I actually ended up giving this novel 4 out of 5 stars, and I can definitely see why this is a favorite for a lot of people. I would say if you are looking for a starting point with Stephen King, this is probably a very good one. It's a pretty quick read. It pulls you in more and more the further along you get. It is dark, it is psychological, and you get a pretty good taste on how well King can build tension. Next, let me tell you about Different Seasons, and unlike the rest of the books in this video, this is a collection of novellas. And most of these actually have film adaptations. And by the way, there is a TV series adaptation in the works for Joyland, and there is a movie in the works for The Long Walk. So there's about to be a lot of Stephen King on our televisions and on the big screen. The 4 novellas included here are Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption, Apt Pupil, The Body, and The Breathing Method. All of them have some level of horror elements, but don't entirely fit into that genre, so it was very interesting to see a different side of King's writing. The first novella ended up being my favorite, though I will admit to bias on my part here because I am a big fan of the film adaptation, and I am of course talking about Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption. The film adaptation of this novella is one of my favorite films of all time. It's something I've seen so many times, I've lost count at this point, and every time I watch The Shawshank Redemption, I think, okay, maybe I know this movie too well at this point and I won't be as blown away by it as before, but nope, I love it more and more every time I watch it. The adaptation is very close to the source material, so if you've seen the film, you have a really good idea of what this is like. The story is set in prison. It is about Andy Dufresne, who has been convicted of killing his wife, and everything is told through the eyes of another inmate. I loved the characters and all of the extra details that I got from this novella. I also really liked that even though things got really dark, it never felt completely hopeless. My only wish was that this was a full novel so I could spend even more time with these characters and get even more details, but I don't really have any real criticisms of this first one. The second novella, Apt Pupil, is easily the most fucked up short story or novella I've ever read. I don't want to spoil anything, but the way King goes from where he starts to where he ends up is absolutely insane. The story is about Todd, a teenage boy who shows up at his neighbor's doorstep and is accusing him of hiding his past as a Nazi. From there, we get a lot of twisted character development, and things really go into some weird directions. As I mentioned, I don't want to spoil anything. However, if you're looking for some twisted and dark characters and not necessarily in the most fun way, this is definitely the novella for you. It did feel a little bit too long to me, and it is the longest novella in the collection. I honestly feel like it could have been its own novel. I don't know why it's in here, but regardless, the psychology of it all and the escalation of tension will absolutely keep you reading and keep you interested. Also, if you've seen the movie adaptation, let me know if it's worth watching or not, because I've heard nothing about it. The third novella, The Body, was easily my least favorite of the 4, which was kind of surprising because it is what Stand By Me, the film, is based on, and it is a great film, so I expected to really like it, but The story is set in the 60s, and these 4 boys decide to go look for the dead body of a presumed dead 12-year-old boy. As this journey unfolds, we find out more about the 4 friends and their lives, and the novella becomes kind of a coming-of-age story of sorts. Honestly, I felt like this was just way too long and bogged down by unnecessary details. I did like the theme of coming to terms with what death is and how King tied it in with the whole growing up aspect, but the whole thing just needed to be tighter and more focused, in my opinion. Also, I don't know if it's just me, but I kept getting confused which boy is which from time to time, which never happens to me while reading. It's not like I don't pay attention. Something about the characterization just kept me from separating these boys. I don't know why, but I was really frustrated by that. I didn't hate the novella, but I just didn't find it that interesting. As I mentioned, I thought it needed more focus and needed less unnecessary details. So this is definitely the case of the movie being better than the book. The last novella, The Breathing Method, is the only one of the 4 that doesn't have a film adaptation. But apparently it's going to have one soon because the movie has been announced for 2020 and I have no idea how they're going to pull this off. It's one of those story within a story situations, and while it didn't grab me right away, once the actual story got going, it got a lot more interesting. It is also the most horror out of all of them, so that was interesting to read, and things definitely get a little bit crazy. I once again don't want to spoil anything for you, but the main story is set in 1930s and has to do with a doctor who has developed this unconventional for the time breathing method that is intended to help women in childbirth, and he has this patient who is very determined to give birth to an illegitimate child. You may be thinking, that does not sound that horrific, but don't worry, King will get you there. I actually really liked this novella, even though it did go a little bit overboard. It had a bit of that classic horror novella feel to it, particularly because of the structure. So I thought it was very good and interesting and kind of unusual. So overall, Different Seasons was a really good collection of novellas, aside from The Body, which I thought was pretty meh. But the rest I really enjoyed, and I would give this a solid 4 out of 5, and I would definitely recommend this. Lastly, we need to talk about The Dead Zone, because this is the novel that went straight to my Stephen King favorites because I could not put this down, and this was just fantastic. The Dead Zone tells the story of Johnny Smith, who gains precognition abilities as a result of an accident. He does have certain limitations, though, because an area of his brain suffered permanent damage, and that is referred to as the Dead Zone. You may remember me talking about this book in a recent video where I talked about my top 5 books I read this summer. If you missed it, the link will be in the info box below. But I did want to talk a little bit more about it in this video. I already mentioned in the other video that I consider Johnny to be one of Stephen King's best characters, and this novel in general really surprised me with the character development and how amazing it was. I will also say that even though Dead Zone hooked me from the very beginning and I was into it right away, there is a bit of this unusual structure going on here because King introduces this second portion of setup as you're pretty far along into the novel. Now, this kind of sounds like things are just slow and the book takes a long time to get to the point, which is not exactly true. What actually happens here is that we get the main character going through major stuff and evolving as a person, and that is all very fascinating, but also we have King introducing a second layer of setup that eventually evolves into this big thing that ends up being the main event of the second half of the novel, and we get our main villain. I found this very interesting and it definitely worked for me, and overall this just ended up being the case of great setup having great payoff. I also never felt like there was too much detail or that we focused on something that didn't need to be focused on, which, considering the length of this novel, I was kind of worried that that might be the case because that has happened to me before. But no, everything felt like it needed to be there. There was never a part where the pacing sagged for me or anything like that, and I thought the ending was just perfect. I know it's not going to be for everyone, but I thought for this novel, it was exactly what it needed to be. As I said earlier, I don't always love Stephen King's endings, but this one I thought was one of his best. Obviously, I ended up giving The Dead Zone 5 out of 5 stars. This is now, as I mentioned, one of my favorite Stephen King novels. And I think between this, The Shining and Pet Sematary, I have found the kind of King that I myself prefer. It is definitely the King novels that have a bit of that creepy supernatural element, but novels that are heavy on character development and the dramatic aspect and the human aspect of the story. Novels that are personal, character-driven dramas first, and supernatural creepiness second. So if you have any recommendations for me based on that, please leave them in the comments below. And that's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. As always, let me know what you have been reading lately and what you think of the novels that I talked about and the novella collection that I talked about today. If you enjoyed this video, which I hope you did, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I hope you're having an awesome day. I will see you very soon in my next video. Bye!